have disabled the share screen for me.
It's really good.
Since you are the host, you have disabled sharing screen, so currently I cannot share.
I've enabled it.
Well, so what I wanted to inform you was that we had earlier given a date for our final assessment, which shall be in the form of short questions or a quiz. But the Kulia asked us to bring it forward, saying that if we don't opt for a final exam, then the final assessment should be during the study period. So I had brought it forward by 2 weeks. So inshallah, we plan to have our final assessment on 28th. Can I share now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try again. Yes, thank you very much. So you'll see that the online quiz or as final assessment, we shall be in the form of a quiz or you see an exam with short questions, with short answers, for which 20 marks are allocated. I have revised the date. The date for your subject will be 27th Monday, 27th of July, Monday during class time. So this is the only change. Earlier, I think it was in the middle of August, meaning after 2 weeks, 2 weeks after this date. So I had bring it forward by 2 weeks, and the new date, inshallah, is 27th July, Monday. Well, now, so we are in the process of discussing legal capacity, where we said 2 ingredients are vital.
Excuse me, sir.
Of the person. Can you hear?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
can you send us a timetable to the website? The timetable just now you show us. The table of the.
Let me increase my.
Like
When
just
I
now you
put
show.
you. Can you repeat, please?
Can you WhatsApp to us the table just now you show us the exam schedule, the quiz schedule, the final test schedule?
Okay, I'll send it, inshallah. I'll send it by email.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
And if Mr. Iqbal is recording this, it should be recorded in the in this video as well. Are you recording, Mr. Iqbal?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, so we're talking about the fundamental requirements as far as the contractors are concerned, which we mentioned to be 2. What are they? Legal capacity, which is the general ability, which pertains to the general ability of the person with regard to contracts. And then after this, we shall refer to another requirement relevant to the contractor, which is referred to as wilaya or legal authority. Well, with regard to legal capacity, we talked about the underlying capacity, which is found in all human beings, which is the capacity of wujub, or the capacity of assuming, through which the person obtains the eligibility and ability to be to have ownership, to enjoy ownership of properties especially, and then to be liable and responsible for all forms of obligations pertaining to property. That was the basic feature of the capacity of assuming, which is something that every human being, irrespective of his nature, age, or condition, has. Well, with regard to legal capacity of execution, I'm not sure whether we discussed this in the class, but we shall go through this briefly. The capacity of execution is not enjoyed or available for every human being, because the basis of this is intelligence or aql. Only those who have the relevant and recognized level of aql in Islamic law, intelligence in Islamic law, they will possess this capacity. So this capacity is not possessed by all human beings, and based on the any variation with regard to intelligence, the capacity can also be affected, and it is not a universally obtained capacity by all human beings. Now, when does this capacity start? It starts with the onset of the age of discernment or tamiz. In the Sharia, the intelligence of the person is started to be recognized from the age of 7. From the age of 7, his intelligence starts to be recognized, and from that moment onwards, the person has the capacity of execution. Well, so here too, this capacity in the complete form is only obtained after a person becomes an adult, which is upon puberty. But even before, as we said, starting from the age of discernment until the age of puberty, unless if we have some form of impediment with regard to understanding and intelligence, a person has the capacity of execution in an incomplete form, which we call Ahliyatul Ada and Naqisa, or the incomplete form of the capacity of the execution. Well, I hope that all of you have come after reading, so and I believe that you can grasp this directly, although I'm not using any diagrams or graphs. Well, so but I can share a screen which gives some basic features of this. Well, so the capacity of execution in the incomplete form starts from the age of discernment, when the person has a sufficient level of intelligence through which he is able to sustain himself and take his food and drink without external assistance, and can also answer calls of nature himself without assistance, which includes the process of cleaning himself properly afterwards. So these are the minimum signs of his having the necessary level of intelligence at its crudest form. And in some schools of Islamic law, a basic understanding of obtaining ownership, sale, purchase, these two are required. Well, so in the capacity of, how do we define this capacity in the incomplete form? We define it as the eligibility of the person to acquire, for the creation or for the recognition of some of his actions and utterances. The eligibility of the person for the recognition, for the legal recognition of some of his actions and utterances. This is based on the fact that his intelligence is now recognized as valid, but since he does not have the capacity in its full form yet, some of his utterances are recognized and some of his actions are recognized. Well, so now this is the age in which, from a religious perspective, the person's belief starts to be recognized, and he is recognized for his acts of devotion. His acts of devotion are accepted, although they are not obliged. He is not obliged to perform them, because obligation starts from after he attains full capacity upon puberty. But before this, if we perform these religious obligations, they are recognized and rewarded, but not fulfilling them is not punishable, and there are no repercussions on his not fulfilling these religious devotions. But during this age, the parents are expected to train him to fulfill his duties and provide him with the relevant and necessary knowledge pertaining to the obligations which shall be relevant to him after he becomes an adult. Well, now with regard to the power to transact during this age, can he enter into contracts of sale and purchase? Now with regard to this, in certain schools of Islamic law, such as the Hanafi school, his ability to create contracts and transactions are looked at under three headings, three categories. One category is where the action or transaction is purely beneficial for him. It results in benefit from him for him only materially, and there is no material loss for him, such as receiving gifts or accepting donation, where there is no return to be made. And if he, and through taking possession and becoming owner and fulfilling completing this contract, he stands to suffer no loss. So such actions are valid even without the intermediary of his guardian. And as far as contracts that result in property loss are concerned, remember that we are talking about loss in terms of property. So any transaction that results in loss property-wise, these transactions are not accepted and not valid at all, neither by uh, this person himself who has only the capacity of the incomplete capacity of execution, and neither do they become valid if his guardian performs them, such as gifting his property to someone else, donating his property. And I think we, in our discussion about loans, we said loan too requires the capacity of tabarru, or the capacity to create gratuitous contracts. So the property of a minor who has this capacity or even less cannot be given as a loan except when there is a specific benefit for the minor. So or those transactions that result in loss for him, they will not be valid from this person who has the incomplete capacity when he creates them himself, or even when the guardians creates them for him. Even the guardian is not entitled to gift away the property of a minor or person who has this capacity. Well, with regard to the third category, which refers to those transactions where property gain or property loss either is possible. He may or may not gain property wise. The transaction could result in gain or could result in property loss, and the transaction or the contract of sale and purchase comes under this category, because he may make a gain through this contract or he may lose through this contract. So in the Hanafi school, especially, a child or a person who has the incomplete capacity of execution can create such a contract, but under the supervision of his guardian. Either under the supervision of his guardian, or who creates this contract and the guardian ratifies and approves this contract. At that point, the contract becomes binding and executed. Until that, the contract remains suspended, as we shall discuss later when you come to discuss about the nature of contracts with regard to suspension and bindingness. So he can initiate this contract, the person who has this capacity, the incomplete capacity of execution, such as a child who has intelligence, who does not suffer from an impairment of intelligence between the age of 7 and puberty. So he can create the contract, but the approval should come from the guardian. Once the guardian approves the contract will become valid. Or the guardian has given prior approval. He has allowed him to create such contracts, then too the contract can become valid. Or the third possibility is that he creates the contract, and then after becoming an adult, he himself approves the contract, provided the conditions such as the availability of the other contractor and the subject matter does not remaining in its original state. These conditions are fulfilled, he can approve the contract once he becomes an adult as well. So the person who has this capacity can create these contracts where loss or profit, loss or gain are possible with the intervention of his guardian. Well, so apart from this, he still may not create contracts himself without the intervention of any other party, which requires the full capacity of execution. Well, now we come to discuss the third capacity of execution, or the second form of the capacity of execution, which is the complete capacity of execution. I'll share this slide. Complete capacity of execution. this is upon the person becoming an adult. Becoming an adult through the when the relevant signs are observed to him, then he becomes an adult. And once he attains adulthood without any impairment of intelligence, without suffering from any defect of intelligence, now he obtains the complete capacity of execution. So we define this capacity as the eligibility of the person for the complete recognition of his tasarrufa, complete recognition of his legal actions and utterances. This is how we define this capacity. So once the person becomes an adult with the necessary level of intelligence, now the foremost effect is that he becomes categorized as a mukallaf in Sharia. Who is a mukallaf? Mukallaf is the person who is addressed by the law, addressed by the Sharia. Now, this means that he becomes bound by the commands of the Sharia, and he is obliged to avoid the prohibitions of the Sharia, and now the Sharia applies to him. Okay? Until that moment, the Sharia did not apply to him in its full force. He had no obligations on him, and the prohibitions were not relevant to him. So after he becomes a person addressed by the Sharia through having become a mukallaf, by having attained the age of puberty with the necessary level of intelligence, now he has to fulfill the commands of Sharia and avoid the prohibitions. So the period before this was for training. And the people who are entrusted with training the child to observe the commands of Sharia and avoid his prohibitions are the parents. It is the parents who are responsible for training him, or any other guardian, by providing him with the necessary knowledge with regard to the commands of Sharia in the fields that are relevant to him, and inform him of how to fulfill its commands and avoid its prohibitions. So this is the basic responsibility of the parents to enable the child by providing him the necessary level of knowledge so that he can attain success in this world and the next. Well, so this attaining of the complete capacity of execution in this way. Now, with regard to contracts involving property, there is an additional feature required in some schools of Islamic law, which is referred to as rushd. Oh, well, it's still incomplete capacity. Well, so there is an additional feature called rushd, which relates to property-related contracts in certain schools of Islamic law, such as the Shafi'i school. Where in the Shafi'i school, in addition to having the complete capacity of execution, the person is expected to have rushd as well for the creation of contracts and for the validity of the contracts which are property related. Now, understand very well that rushd is not a prerequisite for the capacity of execution. This is the misunderstanding that which is very common. Rushd is not a precondition or prerequisite for the complete capacity of execution. Complete capacity of execution is attained by having becoming an adult with a level of intelligence where he is not suffering from any deficiency or defect with regard to his intelligence, and through which he becomes an addressee of the Sharia and becomes a mukallaf. Now, rushd is required for the creation of property-related contracts. Now, what is rushd? Rushd is defined as good sense with regard to, I'll upload a basic slide. the good sense with regard to property matters as well as religious matters, which means that he displays signs of his having the ability to make reasonable judgment with regard to property related matters by not entering into contracts which are obviously resulting in loss. You see? So, and also by not wasting his property away in such a manner that shows that he does not have any sense of value of property at all, to have sound judgment with regard to property matters, and also not to waste his property away in ways which are not beneficial, in such a manner that shows there is some form of factor that affects this sound judgment in his system, and also he does not spend his property in means prohibited by the Sharia. Well, so this is an additional feature required for creating property related contracts in certain schools such as the Shafi'i school. This means that contracts which are not related to property can be created by him even without this feature, but property related contracts require this feature, and once the signs of his having rushd are displayed, it is at that moment that the guardian will hand over his property to him. Until that moment, the guardian will exercise his control over his property, and if he displays signs of rushd along with having become an adult, at that moment the guardian can put his property under his control and care so that he can dispose of and deal in his property himself. If not, the guardian will wait until he shows signs of rushd. At that moment, he will release the property to him. In other schools, such as a Hanafi school, rushd is not a requirement for creating property related contracts, but still the guardian will exercise or continue to exercise his control over his property by way of precaution. And once the person attains the age of 25, whether he has rushd or not, the guardian will necessarily give him control of his property. So if he shows signs of rushd before that, the guardian will release the property to him at that point. And at 25, irrespective of whether he shows signs of rushd or not, provided he has the basic intelligence, the guardian is obliged to release his property to him. Well, so you had to read and find out more details of legal capacity and rushd. Now, we shall move on to discuss about impediments to legal capacity. Mr. Iqbal, how many minutes are left?
How many?
Minutes left.
How many minutes? I'm not sure. I think 10 or 15.
Okay, very good.
20 minutes more.
20. Oh, okay, 20.
That's great. Well, so
Sir, are you giving us the slides?
these are not really slides, just you see, you can notice under what heading we are talking.
Okay.
You see, I'm just 3, not more. Okay, I can give this if necessary.
Okay.
They will not help you much. At least you can have something to focus on, because many of you, I'm told, and I have
No
perceived as well,
materials.
many of you are visual learners. So without looking at something, irrespective of whether it's relevant or irrelevant, without looking at something, you can't absorb. So this is why I am including this well. Now, there are certain aspects called impediments to legal capacity. Since we are talking of the capacity of execution, capacity of assuming is never removed, never affected. Every human being has this. But as far as the capacity of execution is concerned, which is based on intelligence, so it's obvious that anything that affects the intelligence may have some effect on this capacity as well. So from that perspective, there are certain elements or certain factors which we call impediments to legal capacity, and these are factors that can uh, reduce, alter, or remove legal capacity. These factors can reduce or alter or remove legal capacity due to the fact that they have some effect on, adverse effect on the intellect or the intelligence of the person, the aql of the person. So our course outline mentioned some of these. We shall uh, familiarize ourselves with what these are in a very brief manner. You can see here minority, insanity, imbecility, imprudence, terminal illness, bankruptcy, and intoxication. So each of these has quite a lot of details on its own, because these are not topics relevant to contracts only. So there are a lot of details about this, but we shall very briefly see how what these are and what is the principal effect of these on the capacity of execution. As far as minority is concerned, minority is the period before the person obtains the full capacity of execution. So he had not obtained the full capacity of execution yet. It is not really a factor of impediment, but you will see that in some sources it is given as, or is categorized under impediments, because as long as the person is a minor, in the sense that he does not have the complete capacity of execution and is not an adult yet who has a necessary level of intelligence, he will not get the complete capacity of execution. So in that sense, it is an impediment. Well, insanity. Insanity or junoon. Insanity or junoon, for our purpose, which is to see how it affects the capacity of execution of the person, we consider it, or we can define it as uh, deficiency of intellect. Deficiency of intellect, and deficiency of intellect are of two types: insanity and imbecility. Both are categorized as deficiency of intellect, natural forms, or which can result through some disease as well. So both of these are forms of deficiency of intellect. To differentiate these two, one from the other, we define insanity as deficiency of intellect that results in an increased level of perplexion and agitation. This is how we define deficiency for our purpose. This is not a medical definition. This is a definition that helps us to see how it is different from the second form of deficiency, which is imbecility, and what are the obvious signs of this form of deficiency of intellect. Deficiency of intellect that results in, or that causes, an increased level of perplexion and agitation. By perplexion, we means he displays obvious signs of confusion, mental confusion, that his process of thinking and his intelligence is not in order. This is visible. People who deal with him can see that he is mentally confused in to an extraordinary level. And agitation means this is shown through his physical movements as well, meaning he is prone to sudden physical agitation. He could be prone to causing violence. It may not be very safe to be with such a person, because at any moment he can become agitated. So this level of deficiency of intellect, which reflects on his physical movements as well, this we categorize as junoon or insanity, and we call the person majnoon. And if a person suffers from this level of deficiency of intellect, then he will not have the capacity of execution. And if he had the capacity of execution before, it shall be totally removed. So he will be left with the capacity of assuming a wujub only, meaning he can own property, is responsible with the obligations pertaining to property, but all contracts will be handled by the guardian. He has no right to create contracts, and he is not addressed by the commands of Sharia as well. There are no restrictions if it is not fulfilled. Sharia or violate the Sharia, because he has not been given the level of intelligence which is sufficient to fulfill this. Well, so this is Junoon. So his capacity is equal to the capacity of a child below the age of discernment, which is below the age of 7, which means that he does not have any form of the capacity of execution, neither complete nor incomplete. The second form of deficiency of intellect is athar in Arabic, and we can translate as imbecility. In English, you'll come across other terms as well in your English material. So, imbecility is defined as deficiency of intellect that results in deficiency of understanding. Deficiency of understanding and retention. Deficiency of intellect resulting in deficiency of understanding and retention. This is different from Junoon because the person who has this level of deficiency of intellect, he does not give physical signs of his mental deficiency, but he is still confused. And his confusion is evident through his speech. When he starts to speak, his deficiency of intellect is evident. People can notice that he cannot speak like normal person. He starts to speak on something and then suddenly changes track and starts to speak on something else. And also his memory suffers due to this deficiency. Meaning, retention means memory. He cannot retain memory. He can acquire information but cannot return, which is not too uncommon, as we shall perhaps see in the exam. So his power to retain information and to process this information in a coherent manner, both of these are affected, and this is called imbecility. Such a person has the capacity of execution in its incomplete form. He does not have the complete capacity of execution, but he has the capacity of execution in its incomplete form with its relevant features. Well, now there are certain, these are slides I prepared for some other purpose. So as far as our course outline is concerned, it mentions 2 more forms of impediments, which are unconsciousness and sleep. These 2 are also mentioned, which are not here. So unconsciousness or igma, a person can become unconscious. So during the period he remains unconscious, he does not have the capacity of execution. His capacity of execution suffers. So any utterance or action that he does while he is in a state of unconsciousness is not counted because his capacity of execution is not active at that time. And we define this state of unconsciousness not as deficiency of intellect, we define it as dysfunctioning of intellect. Dysfunctioning of the powers of cognition and intentional movement. Dysfunctioning of the powers of cognition and intentional movement. This is how we define in unconsciousness for our purpose. So this means that a person who is unconscious, he cannot absorb information. Cognition means the ability to perceive, understand, and to acquire information through the five senses. It is not, he does not have this. He can see, he may be, his eyes may be open, but he will not be absorbing information through his eyes or through any other source. And also, he lacks the ability of making intentional movements. Any movement of his body would be unintentional, unintended, will not be due to his intending to move in that manner. So this state is referred to as unconsciousness, and during that period, his utterances and actions are not valid. Another state, or another impediment which is similar to unconsciousness. Yes.
We have 1 minute left.
How many?
1 minute. Less than a minute.
Oh, you said 20 minutes earlier. Well, no harm. So another form is sleep. During sleep, a person does not have the capacity of execution. You see? And sleep is similar to unconsciousness, but only that it is natural. We define it as natural languidness, or natural inertia, or natural lethargy that comes on periodically, where his intelligence becomes dysfunctional. So similar to the unconsciousness, his intelligence is dysfunctional during sleep,